ChatGPT said. The accusation fell like a hammer blow long before the guests had gathered, long before the music and the murmurs of Windsor society began their daily climb. That morning, in the cold hush of Ashcombe House, Eleanor stood frozen as her stepmother declared that Clarissa alone would be presented to the visiting ladies of the Queen, for Eleanor, at 27, was a wilted prospect, unfit for notice. The words were delivered without ceremony, as though they were common truth rather than cruelty, and their impact struck with a force Eleanor could neither deflect nor deny. Her father said nothing. He seldom did in matters of his second wife's ambitions. Eleanor bowed her head, still breathing steadily, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. Yet something in her chest tightened with a dull, steady ache. The realization that she had been dismissed not merely as a daughter, but as a woman expected to vanish quietly from hope. By noon they were bound for the garden gathering near Windsor, where Eleanor was expected to remain in the background, while Clarissa sparkled at the forefront of every conversation. Clarissa, radiant in youth and boasting a laugh sharpened for attention, rehearsed her charms beside her in the carriage. She spoke of potential suitors, of titles she believed were already bending toward her, and of the admiration she was certain she would command. Eleanor listened in silence, accustomed to being the canvas on which Clarissa painted her triumphs. She had learned to steady herself through restraint, but the morning's humiliation lingered like a bruise. Upon arrival, Eleanor moved through the paths dutifully, offering polite greetings to those who acknowledged her, accepting the polite disregard of those who did not. She held herself with quiet composure, as though she could fortify her pride through gentility alone. Yet each whisper that drifted toward her, gentle, cutting, pitiful, chipped at the edges of her calm. Such a shame, she heard. A sweet girl, but too late, far too late. Eleanor did not turn, did not correct them, but every syllable burrowed deeper than she wished to admit. The true blow was delivered by Clarissa. Surrounded by a cluster of young ladies, she leaned just close enough for her voice to carry. "My poor sister," she sighed. "She tries so hard to appear content, though she has missed every opportunity a woman ought to have secured by her age." The remark was wrapped in false sympathy, sharpened by envy disguised as innocence. Eleanor's back stiffened. She felt heat rise in her throat, not from shame alone but from a gathering resolve. It was then that she sensed she was not entirely invisible. A presence lingered at the edge of the scene, steady, deliberate, attentive. Alexander Hawthorne, Duke of Ravensshire, observed from a measured distance, his expression unreadable yet intent. Eleanor recognized him from reputation, a widower of several years, known for loyalty to his late wife and for a solemn dignity that kept prying tongues at bay. She had never expected his gaze to fall upon her, much less remain. When Clarissa drifted away to capture more admiring company, Eleanor seized the chance to retreat toward the quieter paths. She needed air, or perhaps silence, something that would allow her thoughts to settle. She had not walked far before she heard a voice, low, composed, touched with curiosity. "Lady Eleanor?" She turned. The Duke inclined his head with a respect she had not been granted all morning. "I hoped I might have a moment." Eleanor steadied herself. "Of course, Your Grace." "I could not help but observe," he began, choosing his words with care, "that you bore an unkindness with admirable restraint." Eleanor felt a ripple of embarrassment, followed by a faint stirring of gratitude. "One grows accustomed," she replied softly. "Expectation can be as confining as any wall." He regarded her with a depth that unsettled her composure more than any insult had. "Accustomed," he repeated. "That seems a burden you were never meant to carry." She resisted the instinct to avert her eyes. "We all bear what society assigns us." "And yet," he countered gently, "some do so with a grace that challenges the assignment." She did not know how to respond. His words felt too generous, almost dangerous in their sincerity. She searched his face for mockery and found none. Instead, she found an earnestness that called forth a part of herself she had long kept quiet, one that wished to be seen not for usefulness, nor for youth, but for spirit. Their conversation drifted toward literature, the recent debates in Parliament, and the quiet solace of long walks. Eleanor found her voice warming with each exchange, freed from the guardedness that often shaped her speech. Alexander listened as though each thought she offered held worth. It unsettled her, but it also lifted her. When Clarissa reappeared, interrupting with calculated sweetness, Alexander did not turn toward her as most men did. Instead, he continued speaking to Eleanor, even asking her opinion on a matter Clarissa could not pretend to understand. Clarissa faltered, her smile thinning as she excused herself with stiff politeness. As the sun dipped toward late afternoon, Alexander's tone shifted, gaining a subtle earnestness. "Lady Eleanor," he said, "I hope this is not the last conversation we share today." The word struck her with quiet force. For a moment, Eleanor forgot the morning's cruelty and felt the faintest stirring of possibility. Yet in Clarissa's distant glare, she sensed danger gathering like a storm that chose its moment with care. She inclined her head gracefully, though her pulse quickened. "Nor I, your grace." Alexander offered a slight nod before stepping away to attend to a waiting acquaintance. But Eleanor felt the shift, undeniable and trembling, as though the day's humiliation had cracked open an unexpected doorway. She knew Clarissa had seen it too, and the flicker in her stepsister's eyes promised consequences yet unseen. She sensed the afternoon would not pass without a test of resolve. ChatGPT said, the scandal began before Eleanor even stepped beyond the threshold of her room the next morning, for Clarissa had already scattered a poisoned rumor through the corridors of Ashcombe House. She claimed the Duke's brief conversation with Eleanor had been nothing more than pity for an aging wallflower desperate for male attention, and the servants, eager for amusement, carried her words with brisk efficiency. By the time Eleanor descended the staircase, she felt the weight of glances that lingered too long, as though her very presence confirmed the tale. She steadied herself, refusing to ask what had been said. The truth would reveal itself soon enough, as all cruelty eventually did. Eleanor's silence only fueled the household's appetite for misinterpretation, but she refused to surrender her composure as she prepared for the afternoon's garden promenade, hosted by the Forsyths. She had considered excusing herself, yet the thought of hiding felt like surrender to Clarissa's ambition. Before leaving, she discovered a small envelope tucked beneath her gloves, a note written in a hand she recognized from the Duke's family correspondence, requesting a moment together among the rose paths. The unexpected gentleness of the message stirred both hope and dread within her, for such attention, however discreet, could become perilous ammunition in Clarissa's hands, and she feared its discovery would invite fresh cruelty before nightfall. When Eleanor arrived at the Forsyth estate, she felt the hush of speculation trail her steps like an unwelcome shadow. Guests paused mid-conversation, eyes drifting between her and the empty stretch of path where the Duke had yet to appear. Clarissa, luminous in pale blue silk, swept toward a circle of admirers and loudly declared her anticipation of a royal cousin's arrival, ensuring she stood at the social center. Eleanor remained near the periphery, resolved not to appear tense. When Alexander finally approached, conversation faltered. He greeted her with a warmth so unguarded that several onlookers exchanged stunned glances, their assumptions abruptly reshaped by his unexpected display of gentle regard there. Eleanor attempted to temper her reaction, though a subtle tremor betrayed her surprise. Alexander offered her his arm for a walk, and she accepted, acutely aware of the whispers gathering behind them. He spoke of the gardens with a reflective softness, yet there was purpose beneath each carefully chosen phrase, as though he wished to reassure her without drawing undue notice. She found herself answering with an honesty she rarely permitted, admitting her fondness for quiet corners where judgment softened. His gaze lingered on her then, steady and contemplative, and she sensed he saw far more than she intended. Clarissa, watching from afar, stiffened with unmistakable fury at their growing closeness. The promenade continued with increasing tension, for Clarissa refused to allow Eleanor even a moment of unchallenged ease. She drifted close whenever possible, inserting herself with bright laughter and feigned ignorance, yet Alexander's attention did not waver. Each interruption strengthened a quiet understanding between him and Eleanor, as though they shared a battle neither had spoken aloud. When a sudden gust stirred loose petals across the lawn, Alexander used the moment to guide Eleanor toward a secluded alcove lined with ivy. There, shielded from prying eyes, he spoke with a sincerity that unsettled her resolve, asking whether she had felt unduly burdened by the morning's rumors and how she endured them. Eleanor hesitated, torn between the instinct to conceal her wounds and the rare safety his presence offered. She admitted the whispers had stung more deeply than she wished, though she tried to mask the sharpest edges of her grief. Alexander listened with unbroken attention, his expression marked by a solemn empathy that suggested he knew something of isolation himself. He spoke of expectations, of how society clung to narrow definitions of worth, and his words settled over her like a balm she feared to trust. She felt unexpectedly seen, an unsettling sensation that both comforted and frightened her. Clarissa's distant gaze, fixed upon them, promised escalation before the day's end indeed. Their brief solitude ended when the Forsyth footman announced the arrival of several influential guests, prompting the gathering to shift toward the central lawn. Eleanor attempted to slip back into the crowd, but Alexander remained close, guiding her through the surge of bodies with a subtle protectiveness that did not escape notice. Clarissa hurried to intercept them, her smile brittle as frost, and loudly inquired whether Eleanor had enjoyed her charitable escort. The remark cut sharply, but before Eleanor could form a response, Alexander addressed Clarissa with crisp civility, stating that he had sought Eleanor's company by choice. A ripple of murmur spread outward, reshaping the atmosphere entirely around them all. Eleanor felt the shift immediately, a mixture of awe and apprehension rising within her as several guests turned uncertain glances toward Clarissa, who struggled to reclaim her composure. Alexander's defense had been subtle, yet decisive enough to fracture the narrative Clarissa had woven so confidently. As the gathering resumed its routine rhythm, Eleanor sensed her world tilting toward something she scarcely dared to imagine, possibility, dangerous and fragile. Still, she knew Clarissa would not relinquish her ambitions without retaliation. When Alexander leaned close and quietly asked whether she might grant him another walk before the evening ended, Eleanor felt a tremor of anticipation. Clarissa, overhearing, went pale with cold intent forming swiftly. As twilight neared, the gathering shifted to the lantern-lit terrace, where musicians prepared for the evening's first selections. Eleanor found herself momentarily alone, the air cool against her thoughts as she tried to steady the tumult within. The Duke's kindness had altered the rhythm of her day, leaving her senses sharpened and her judgment uneasy. She feared hoping for what could not be, yet some fragile part of her whispered that his actions held greater meaning. When she turned, she saw Alexander speaking with the hostess, his expression intent. Clarissa hovered nearby, poised to strike with renewed venom should opportunity arise, her ambition tightening like a blade in the waning evening air now. The argument began with a tremor, then erupted like a crack of thunder through the manor's west wing. Voices ricocheted off polished wainscoting, turning the quiet afternoon into a battlefield of grievances. Eleanor had not intended to overhear. She rarely intended anything that drew attention to herself, but the words hurled by her stepsister, Charlotte, slammed through the half-open door and lodged like splinters in her chest. Charlotte accused their father of indulgence, of wasting resources on a daughter who, at 8 and 20, had become a burden, a fading ornament no one has chosen. Eleanor stood frozen at the threshold, clutching her gloves until the seams bit her skin. She should have stepped away. She should have pretended she heard nothing. But Charlotte's next words delivered the tragedy Eleanor had always feared. If she insists on attending the season, it will fall to me to explain why she is past her prime, why no respectable gentleman has ever made the slightest inquiry. The blow landed with humiliating precision, and Eleanor's breath abandoned her. She backed from the door slowly, as though the floor might collapse under her weight, and fled the corridor before either of them noticed her shadow wavering along the wall. She did not cry. Tears were indulgences she had trained herself to suppress, but her pulse throbbed painfully at the base of her throat. She had known Charlotte's opinion of her, of course. Charlotte's beauty made cruelty effortless, yet hearing the words spoken aloud with such triumphant certainty awakened something raw in Eleanor, something she had tried to bury with composure and quiet obedience. She walked toward the gardens, needing air, needing space large enough to carry her shame. The winter sun left the grounds pale and hushed, bare branches clawing at the sky. She welcomed the cold, its clarity slicing through her confusion. She had spent years believing that gentleness, her greatest strength, was also her greatest flaw. She had been raised to remain unobtrusive, to speak softly, to not disrupt Charlotte's radiance. That life had become a habit, and habits, she discovered, were easily mistaken for fate. She reached the stone balustrade overlooking the frozen fountain and pressed her palms against its icy surface. Charlotte was wrong, she told herself. Perhaps not entirely. Eleanor was no sparkling debutante, but she possessed reason, insight, and a quiet resilience that no one had ever cared to see. She muttered the words like a fragile incantation, hoping they might form a shield if repeated often enough. Behind her, footsteps crunched over frost. Eleanor stiffened. She did not need to turn to know who it was. She recognized his gait, the steady confidence wrapped in restraint. The Duke of Ravensfield, accustomed to carrying entire rooms in the span of a single glance, moved with a gravity that made silence feel reverent. "I feared you might walk all the way to Scotland if I did not catch you," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. Eleanor inhaled sharply. She had not expected him today. She was never prepared for him, for the unsettling warmth his presence stirred, for the way he regarded her as though she bore the power to alter the trajectory of his thoughts. She turned slowly, ensuring her expression was neutral. "Your Grace, I apologize. I did not realize I had gone so far." He studied her face with unsettling precision. "You are upset." The words were not a question. She hesitated, uncertain how much of her wounded pride she could reveal without seeming childish. "It is nothing of consequence." "I do not believe that," he replied gently, and the softness in his voice threatened the composure she clung to. He stepped closer. "Eleanor, something has shaken you. Allow me the courtesy of understanding." She nearly faltered at the sound of her name spoken with such earnestness. Courtiers addressed her formally. Charlotte rarely addressed her at all. But the Duke spoke as though the syllables held meaning, as though he saw a woman rather than a shadow. "I overheard a conversation," she confessed finally. "Unpleasant but familiar. It changes nothing." His eyes narrowed. "Who spoke ill of you?" She shook her head. "It does not matter. I am accustomed to being the less remarkable sister." He exhaled sharply, displeasure flickering across his features. "Who decided such a foolish thing? Certainly not anyone with sense." His tone held no mockery, only conviction, and that frightened her more than cruelty ever could. She stepped back instinctively, yet he did not advance. "You ought not say such things," she whispered. "They create misunderstandings." "Only if they are untrue." His expression softened. "Eleanor, do you not see yourself as others might, if only they had the patience to look?" She lowered her gaze. "Patience is not fashionable this season." He laughed under his breath, though she suspected humor was not his true impulse. "I find fashion deeply overrated." His reply unsettled her further. She had never known how to navigate admiration, certainly not admiration from a man who outranked nearly everyone in London, whose reputation for integrity had earned him more reverence than his title alone could command. She did not understand why he sought her company during assemblies, why he lingered by her side during evenings, when suitors circled Charlotte like moths. Before she could respond, the garden door slammed open. Charlotte's voice pierced the cold. "Eleanor, there you are. Father is searching for you. Honestly, wandering off like a governess, oh." She faltered upon noticing the Duke. Her expression shifted instantly to practiced charm. "Your Grace, I did not realize you were here. What a pleasant surprise." The Duke's demeanor cooled, though his politeness never faltered. "Lady Charlotte." He turned back to Eleanor, offering a subtle, steadying glance. "I hope to continue our conversation later." Charlotte's brows arched. Conversation? About what? Eleanor opened her mouth, but found no words. The Duke saved her. "Matters of sincerity," he said lightly. "A rare topic." Charlotte forced a laugh, but suspicion tightened her eyes. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She sensed danger, not physical, but the kind born of envy, the kind that could unravel reputations with a whisper. As they walked back toward the manor, Charlotte leaned close enough for only Eleanor to hear. "Careful," she hissed. "Men like him do not marry women like you. Do not humiliate yourself by imagining otherwise." Eleanor absorbed the poison quietly. She had no strength to counter it, but when she glanced back at the Duke, she found him watching her, not Charlotte, with an expression that contradicted every cruel prophecy her stepsister had spoken. And in that moment, as his gaze lingered with unspoken intent, Eleanor realized something terrifying. Charlotte might be wrong, completely wrong, which meant Eleanor might be standing at the edge of a precipice she had never dared approach, one where the next step could shatter everything she believed about herself.